I'm going to call this meeting of the Plan Commission to order. If we could have a roll call when you're ready.
Mr. Betry, Ms. Bindum, Mr. Fell,
Here.
Mr. Fitch,
Here.
Mr. Hopkins,
Here.
Mr. Otto,
Here.
Mr. Storr,
Here.
Mr. Trail.
Here.
We do have a quorum. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No, sir.
Minutes from February 19th, 2015. Can I get a motion for approval of the minutes? Mr. Trail, second?
I've got a question.
Do we have a second?
I've got a question about the minutes. Did we actually
Can we get the minutes
approve?
in play?
A second, I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Hopkins. All right, Mr. Storr.
Okay. I noticed that thank you. I noticed that the establishment for the set-off for the gaming hall is 100 feet. Did we not suggest a larger distance?
I think we
Or was that only discussed?
my recollection is it was discussed. We can discuss it further when we get into the case, if you choose. Any changes to the minutes? Well, all those in favor of approving the minute, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The minutes are approved. Are there any communications tonight?
No, sir.
We now have continued public hearing, Plan Case 2250 T15. Request by the zoning administrator to amend Article 2 and 5 of the zoning ordinance to establish gaming halls. Mr. Marks.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to recuse myself from
Mr. Fell is going to recuse himself
and the new public hearing.
from both.
So I'm just going to, unless you need me, I'll.
I think we have a quorum, so your continued attendance is entirely up to you.
So continuing from the last meeting, we have put some changes to the proposed
amendment to add the definition of gaming hall, establish definitions, use provisions, and special use permissions. So regarding the definition, we made the definition a little more hard in terms of more solid definable criteria that included a presence of a seating area devoted to video gaming that is greater than the specific criteria than the seating area for food and beverage or service or general merchandise. An estimated net revenue of at least 40% or more derived from video gaming terminals, an overall size of 1,500 square feet or less, the absence of a full-service kitchen or any food service, and the proposed amendment would still provide veterans establishments and fraternal establishments such as the VFW or American Legion as exempted from the definition of gaming hall. As requested and inquired by the Commission towards use category restrictions, they have been excluded from all zoning districts in the zoning ordinance. They have been changed from a conditional use to a special use in B3 general business, B4 central business, and B4E central business expansion as well. They'd still be reserved strictly for commercial areas and insulated from any residential areas or mixed use areas or university-oriented districts. And approval of a special use permit would require the applicant to show that their use is not detrimental to the public welfare. And it also adds standard conditions under section 7.5 of the zoning ordinance. And it would still include the state required minimum of 100-foot distance between gaming halls and schools or places of worship. And the Commission also asked about the possibility of an establishment slowly or gradually changing from video gaming as an accessory use to that of a principal use over a certain amount of time, and staff consulted and decided that this would be similar to a change in any use. There would be determined it would be a zoning use violation, with field investigations and a determination of what the principal use is, with a citation for abatement, and it would also be handled with the requirement, if that it was determined that video gaming was a principal use, the required obtainment of a special use permit, and it would be prosecuted the same way as any zoning use violation would be. And we also checked into your request about gaming hall ownership restrictions, and if restrictions could be put on how many of the facilities a single person may own, or if you could require the owner of a gaming hall to reside in the city. The city's attorney's office determined that those really can't be placed in the zoning ordinance, and it would not withstand legal challenges. There is language in the state law that that allows for to limit economic concentration that's permissible within the city code, but otherwise there wouldn't be much to restrict in that regard. And as a reminder, kind of some information I placed in the memorandum on the first hearing that was held regarding this about a month ago, I just inserted what two different communities, unincorporated Lake County, as well as the city of Bloomington, what they have done in terms of restricting gaming halls as well. Criteria not too different from what we proposed for this hearing. So with that said, the staff recommends approval of this proposed text amendment. And I just also wanted to mention some of the exhibits. We still put the map of existing and potential video gaming establishments in the city, as well as the proposed text amendment. I included a excerpt from the Illinois state law regarding the specific definitions of video gaming machines in regards to a question from the commission's hearing last week, or 2 weeks ago. And also there was questions as to how the establishment, the fraternal establishments, such as the VFW and the American Legion. I just included a letter from the American Legion Post that we had sent out a notice to all license holders within the city or applicants for a pending license, just letting them know what would be happening. This was for the last meeting, and this was feedback that we had received in response from that letter. So I included that mainly as a response to inquiries from the last meeting about that. So,
Great, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Marks? Mr. Trail?
Where does the 1,500 square feet come from?
1,500 square feet is just a general estimate based on the size of food and beverage establishments, as well as existing gaming halls, and language found in other statute descriptions as to the likely size of gaming halls.
So if for whatever reason, someone decided to locate something that would otherwise meet the criteria for a gaming hall and building 1,510 square feet, they would not fall under the definition of a gaming hall.
They still could fall. It says included but not limited to. They would, if they met the other criteria of being over 40% or a larger seating area, the absence of a kitchen or food
What's the advantage of having a size criteria here at all?
it's just a further descriptor to provide better information as to a better defined definition, or a better definition, a more specific definition.
Thanks.
Any further questions? Mr. Storr?
Thank you. Could you elaborate some more about the city of Bloomington and their language explicitly prohibiting license for an establishment with video gaming as its principal use?
The city certainly had the same debate that the city of Urbana is having. This was relatively recent that they enacted it last year. The language that we adopted for this is similar to there. It's a little more qualitative. It's more in the discretion of the zoning administrator. With this version that we've provided, it's a little more definitive in terms of being able to answer, a yes or no question. But was there a specific regard that you were curious about? I mean, they also, in some of their public hearings, they came up with other possible principles of defining a gaming hall, which they rejected, which, I won't go into here because they're a little more ambiguous or, I think, less straightforward. But what they provided is what they decided to go with. If there was a specific, was there a specific question you had about what they had enacted in their statute, or?
I think that we had a rather consistent sense of opinion at the previous meeting that many of the members, if not the bulk of them, were not in favor of seeing these facilities located in Urbana.
I think the problem with that was that we can't ban them through the zoning ordinance, so it'd have to be through the liquor ordinance or something else. Mr. Trail?
Quickly, did Bloomington do a similar thing? They, through the zoning ordinance, defined what they were,
Through
and
the-
then the Bloomington City Council used that as leverage to ban them?
It was through their city code in which liquor licenses are able to be issued.
So they did the entire thing. They didn't change their zoning to recognize gaming halls as a use, and then the city council banned it, or they just did straight through the code, didn't worry about zoning, and simply banned them?
They went straight through the city code, yes.
Anything further? Thank you, Mr. Marks. Further discussion on this text amendment? Is it where we want it to be is in terms of possible motions and voting? In other words, do we want to vote on it, or do we want to try to approve it further? Mr. Storr, you were...
I really don't see how a gaming hall enhances our community, and if we can't outright ban it, I'd certainly do something to discourage it. And I think that the minimum of 100 feet, which is only the distance from this chamber to the front door, is an entirely remarkably small distance, and a more appropriate distance would be 1,000 feet if we were going to adopt proposed, what's been proposed.
Thank you. Any further comments or motions? Discussion? Mr. Otto, you're fixing to do something.
I still can't quite wrap my mind around what's going on here. I mean, it feels like we're being pushed to introduce a new zoning category. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's being tried to be achieved. I mean, as I still understand it, originally this came in as a way of supporting existing businesses and fraternal organizations, and we have a letter here from a fraternal organization saying that it's not directly addressed to, well, it is to Urbana Community Development Services, saying that they won't join the UBA because the revenue has dropped $56,000 from last year, and they can't compete with the so-called restaurants hotspot, which was mentioned, da-da-da-da. So we're told that if we allow these establishments, marginal restaurants and fraternal organizations can thrive. And so then licenses are given to sham operations where it's not a secondary use, it is a primary use. And so now we're told we can't enforce the primary use thing, we have to come up with some category to allow these things because they already exist. And I feel somehow that I'm not being given the right tools to address this.
Yeah, I
And
agree with
so-
you on that.
If we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this, let's say 2,500 feet distance between gaming halls.
Do I hear 5,000?
Well, what we can do, and what I think the road that we've gone down, we had a lot of discussion about, you know, what is the obligation of the public hearing requirements if we were to send it as it was originally written. Just had we said no at that point, let's just for the sake of discussion, and the city council had desired to amend it significantly, it would have had to come back to us for another public hearing, and then go back to the council for approval. I think is what my understanding was, Mr. Engstrom.
It depends on what the council wanted to amend. As long as they only change things that were in the original legal ad,
Yes.
then they could approve it on the spot.
That makes perfect sense. So in lieu of that, I think what we tried to do is tighten it, make it so that it's a special use rather than by right, and tighten the definition and things of that nature that we've asked the city staff to do. And now we can either continue to tighten it and then vote on it, or we can vote on it, approve it, or not approve it. Now, having improved the thing and tightened it, our record clearly reflects the opinion that most of us, and I share it, that I don't think this is a beneficial use for Urbana. The record reflects it. We've tightened the amendment as far as we could, and if we still vote against it, it sends a signal to the council that we don't think these are appropriate establishments for Urbana. We can't get the council to ban them. I mean, that's up to the council. But we've talked about how they could if they choose to do that, and it's in the record. So that's kind of where we're at. Mr. Trail.
I think there are good elements and bad elements. If our intent was to identify a use and say, we want to make sure that use requires a special permit, we're going to have to define it. The fact that we can't, through zoning, you know, literally just say, okay, you just can't have these. I guess theoretically, we could make it just not a permitted, once we've identified it, make it not a permitted use in any zone.
I think that's what the city attorney said we could not do. That was
Okay.
something we discussed.
So the extent that if we want to limit it in some way via zoning, we're going to have to define it. So I think we're going to have to do that if we want to take that kind of action. I'm not necessarily against that. So I was a little leery of the idea of even starting to call it out, which sounds sort of permissive. But if we're going to say that you must have a special use, I think we could be a little tighter on the criteria to be considered in a special use. I certainly like the idea of a lot more than 100 feet. Although I'm more concerned, at least as concerned with their separation from each other. I think the worst things, the detrimental effects of the community are only multiplied when they're too close together. You create not just a single entity, but perhaps whole blocks or whatever, where some citizens may simply not want to go. I mean, it may, by that nature, affect other businesses. So I think we're on an okay path, but I don't think it's really where I think it ought to be. I think we could probably do a little bit more in the absence. For all I know, the city council could theoretically just ban them. I don't know. I don't think they're going to do that. But I think we could certainly do a few more things, given the idea that they're probably not going to be banned, through zoning to make sure that they're at least as less harmful as possible.
Well, anything besides along those lines, besides the distance between gaming halls? Are you worried about the daycare centers as well, or?
I'm worried about the daycare center as well, but I'm really more concerned, because honestly, it's only for pre-existing uses. Someone could open a daycare center next door to it.
Sure, sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't, but I'm more concerned with the idea of providing separation between these establishments.
Okay, thank you. Well, if there's nothing else other than that, we could start to entertain a motion that would include a recommendation for a different, on the provision that there's a different, larger distance between gaming halls, or make it apply to gaming halls, daycare centers, and educational facilities, or whatever, however the language reads there.
I assume, though, that we would be limited in doing so by, we couldn't say 15 miles, which would, for all intents and purposes,
Allow one, yeah.
Yeah, allow one.
Yeah.
So somewhere in there, something more than 100, but less than 15 miles, I think is appropriate.
I think in actually, I was trying to think about when we did the gun shop. We let me look that up real quick. Or not the gun shop, the firing range. We did stretch that a little bit. Actually, we just said there had to be a public hearing, and we increased the distance for notification of a public hearing to 500 feet. So we didn't increase any setback, but the idea there was to widen the range around which notification had to happen. In this case, if we took that approach, well, we can just go ahead and extend recommend to extend the buffer. If we took that approach, then what would happen is you'd get more interested land owners, and in a special use case, a single written objection prompts the council to have a 2/3 majority. So even in any case, with the 100 feet, 500 feet, any written objection, it doesn't have to be from somebody within that buffer, but any written objection in a special use case is a 2/3 majority. So that's a pretty significant hurdle that would have to be crossed. I don't know how popular or unpopular these things would be. I suspect the chances that somebody objects would, it could happen. Anything further? My feeling is I'd rather not continue this. I'd rather move it. And if you want to say I think if we're going to approve it, then we change the distance. If we're not, then we don't. And it's clear in the record that how we feel about it, that it should be larger than 100 feet, perhaps 500 feet, maybe 1,000 feet. I don't know, to your point of what's reasonable, I don't know beyond that.
I guess to some extent You know, it's like the most we could get without getting into trouble.
Yes, and I don't know what that is. I don't. I think beyond 500 feet, we'd start to get, it might start to be problematic. I don't know. We did 1,000 feet on billboards, but they're, Jeff, Mr. Engstrom?
Yes, the largest buffer requirement we've seen in terms of state law is 1,000 feet.
Yeah,
So I think that could be,
the outer limit.
yep.
Makes sense. All right, well,
Could we make that 1,000 feet not only from other gaming halls, but other,
to apply to all the institutions mentioned in that section?
yes,
Sure.
good.
All right, well, ball is in your court, gentlemen. That's,
You're looking at me.
No, I just, there's so much about this, it just seems so wrong to me. If, I mean, the
What-
linkage of alcohol and the gambling.
that's strange, very strange, I agree. You can't do video gambling unless you sell liquor. That part, but that's the state.
But
right?
that's
That-
state law.
That's
That's
right,
state law. I mean,
exactly. But
Um,
I'll just tell you, I intend to vote against it. So that's where I'm at. And so that, I get you.
So you intend to vote against it.
I do.
So why, and I'm not actually saying I'm going to vote for it, but I'm saying, what's your reasoning for why you personally are going to vote against this in its entirety?
Well, I think Mr. Otto stated it more, pretty clearly, and I agree with it, that really, in my opinion, these types of establishments don't add money into the community. They draw money out of the community. And the social costs that are associated may at least offset any money that they do accumulate.
My concern is,
I mean, I don't have a moral issue with it
Yeah,
necessarily.
how does our interaction on this, I'm not really sure how, whether we vote against it or whether we vote for it, whether either one of those furthers that goal. I'm just not sure exactly how doing this or not doing this plays into it either way.
I think the only thing is what I said before, that it signals to the council, based on the record and based on our vote, that we don't think these are appropriate for Urbana. If we vote no. And so that's why I'm going to vote no.
Let me express myself to city staff, some of my frustration. On page 4 from the February 19th memorandum, I asked about Hotspot misrepresenting the purpose of their business. Mr. Engstrom explained that at the time that Hotspot came to the city, there were no mechanisms to use to determine the business as a gaming hall. City staff knew that the business intended to install video gaming machines, so Hotspot did not misrepresent themselves. It was a failure of the zoning ordinance to have a use to put them under, so the zoning administrator had to default to what the closest use was in the table of uses. So they say, we want a permit for a restaurant, but we're not going to have a restaurant. We're going to have gaming and a cooler. And it seems to me, I would like city staff to say, no, you have to have a restaurant, because we don't have any category of gaming hall. So once you build your restaurant, then you can have gaming. But you can't say, there's no category for gaming hall, so give me a restaurant permit so I can have a gaming hall. That bothers me. It seems like it's a misuse of the code. And it's sticking in my craw deeply, which is why every time it comes time to consider what to do here, I feel like this is being jammed down our throat in a way that is unpleasant. And I hope it's not happening in other circumstances where someone comes and says, I intend to do this activity, and the response is, well, there really is no appropriate zoning for that activity, so do it here. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, now, yeah, I hear you. To be clear, though, the community development staff doesn't approve the licenses. So,
It's, the zoning administrator had something to do with it because they said that Hotspot didn't misrepresent themselves, so they had to default to what was the closest use. So, I mean, there's something, I mean, maybe you can explain it to me in a way that gets me off of my high horse, but, you know, it seems like the determination already was made. We're going to have gaming halls, and we're going to give them a permit for this. And now we're going to come back and put pressure to say it's time to address this so we have gaming halls. It seems like there would have been an opportunity to sort of say, we don't have a category for this. You want to build a restaurant that's principal use or a bar, and this is the criteria.
Surely you're not suggesting that if somebody wanted to open a brothel, that they could claim that it was a restaurant. I mean,
No, that's a banned activity in the state of Illinois, as far as I know. I mean,
well, the Silver Bullet is one of the gambling locations. It's not a brothel.
and I'm sure that they make a lot of money off of their other sorts of activities there.
They do. Probably a lot more than they do off a game.
The
Yeah,
gaming is a
exactly.
secondary use.
Yeah, I agree.
I guess I could address that. When Hotspot came to the city, I don't want to say they told us they were going to be a principal use gaming hall. They said they wanted to have a cafe and they wanted to have gaming machines. So at the time, we looked at it, and the closest use appeared to be cafe. And since that, gaming halls have been, or gaming machines have become more popular, and that's why we've been pushing for this amendment to address that. So we'll have a means to address that when it comes up in the future. And I think if the commission is against gaming halls as a principal use, I think I would recommend you vote down the proposed amendment and send a message to council that you think they should be prohibited through city code.
Mr. Storr? Thank you, Ms. James.
Thank you, Jeff. If we wanted to elaborate on this or give the council more of a feeling of more of our intention, should we increase the distance and perhaps the types of places that that these should be separated from?
From what we've seen tonight, we'll definitely include those recommendations or those convey your wishes through the memo to City Council. I don't know if you need to go through making a motion and amending it to do so.
That was
Yeah. Mr. Hopkins, did you have something?
So I'm trying to play out Jeff's suggestion. I don't know, and it's kind of surprising there's no conversation about it, but I guess that's the way it's supposed to work at this point, what the city council actually thinks. And if they think they want to allow them, then the most likely, well, maybe I need to back up. Because the use is not a banned state use, we cannot ban it through the zoning ordinance. So what's going to happen is it's going to be treated as whatever the zoning administrator considers the closest defined use under the current zoning ordinance. If the city council chooses not to ban it, I want them to adopt our version, current version of the recommendation, which, remember, is quite different from what was initially brought to us. And although I agree that the record makes it clear to the council what we think, I might be inclined to first amend it. And I'm not sure that voting against it actually sends the right message. I might be inclined to make a statement with my vote that the council should ban them through the gaming license, which I guess is actually a distinct license from the liquor license, even though it's actually done through the liquor board. And if they do not, then this amendment to the zoning ordinance should be made. Because I don't want the outcome that the city council says, well, we want these because we want the revenue. And the plan commission voted against this tougher restriction, so we'll just leave it the way it is and not even make a distinction, let them be treated as restaurants, because the state law requires them to also sell liquor. So, you know, it's not a stretch of the imagination to claim that the closest thing to them is a restaurant or bar. And we would be in a worse place. So I guess I guess in a way what I'm trying to figure out is what's the most effective way to communicate precisely that message. And having stated it might be, but then the question is, what do we do to vote?
Yeah, you stated it very well.
So-
And that's,
so I
that is
think
the
I
dilemma.
would be inclined to amend it to 500 feet. I'm a little concerned about 1,000 without looking at a map, because I think the locations of schools, you might discover that you've eliminated the places where they should be.
Yeah, I think 500 is probably
But
more appropriate.
in any case, that's how I'm thinking.
Mr. Trail?
Well, in that instance, maybe the statement should be enumerated and say, here it is. We want to make sure that these, when these come, you're not classifying it as something else. These are the thing. And leave it at that, but with the recommendation from this council that say, this thing, we're enumerating it, ban it. However you do so, because in that instance, by both enumerating it and passing
I know how to do it.
limitations on it,
Straw poll.
we're leaving the impression that we're saying, okay, well, they might be okay with these limitations.
So let's do a straw poll, a show of hands. If we could ban these establishments through the zoning ordinance, how many think they would be in favor of that? That's five votes in favor and no votes against. So there's the statement on the record. If the Plan Commission could ban gaming halls through the zoning ordinance, we would. We would recommend that the council, yeah, having no official power.
Well,
Yeah.
And, I mean, I think I would go even further and say that we would recommend that the council ban it through the powers it does have, which we do not have.
Mr. Otto?
I'm ready to do a variation of option C that's presented to us, which is, and I'm ready to move, and then we can start the amendments, which is to forward the proposed zoning amendment to the city council with a recommendation for approval as modified by specific suggested changes and recommendations to city codes, with the recommendation being that through their powers, as Lou said, gaming halls be banned.
So make that part of the motion.
But go ahead and send the best version of this that we can come up with so that they have to, if they do want to go ahead and they think our restrictions are too strict, they're gonna have to go through item by item and undo what we have done. So
I think you might be bringing me around. That's pretty logical.
I move that the approval of Plan Case 2250-T-15, the language in Exhibit B.
B or C? Did you say?
Are we on different?
No, Exhibit B is the language of the ordinance. Yeah, the revised language.
The revised language.
With a 500-foot.
No, well, we need this in a second.
Okay,
And
okay.
then you can start doing
Sure.
amendments to it before we come back
All
and
right,
vote on it.
sounds good. All right, moved by Mr. Otto, seconded by Mr. Hopkins.
Now, let's be clear about what the motion actually includes. So it's, I don't have it in front of me.
A couple pages after that.
It's on Exhibit B, page 1.
There it is.
Yeah. So it includes the revised and tightened definitions of what a gaming hall is, and some of the criteria, including but not limited to.
No, it's the whole thing, right?
Correct.
Because all of section 2.3 is new.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, but the motion also includes that we recommend that the council ban gaming halls through the handling of gaming licenses.
As far as I know, Mr. Otto, that's correct.
That's correct.
And if they don't, this amendment to the zoning ordinance should be.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
So the motion is to approve the language as revised in the staff memo of Exhibit B with a further recommendation that the city council act through the city code to ban gaming halls as defined in the zoning ordinance. Now they'll have to move that definition out of the zoning ordinance. But
Does that include a longer, a
We
greater
haven't-
dist- a
no-
greater
Not
distance?
yet.
Not yet.
Not yet, not yet, okay.
Do we have a map we can get quick access to on the screen? Actually, forget it. I've got the zoning map in front of me.
Yeah, there's this little map, but you can't tell how far. It looks
No,
like.
I've got the zoning.
What kind of a map are you curious to see?
Well, I'm trying to think about things like how far Thomas Paine is from Philo Road,
Yeah.
or how far the high school is from Main Street,
So what I could do, I could pull up.
how far the child care facility at the Methodist Church is from Main Street.
Don't we potentially run into issues if our, because remember, we're not really looking at the whole
Where would that
city,
be?
we're only looking
Just-
at certain zones.
Should I just look it up on the case?
Because they're not permitted
Cases.
outside certain zones.
Well,
Right.
Philo
Commercial.
Road and Main Street would be.
Right.
Remember what-
So
Do you remember
500
when that
feet
would
may
be?
seem small in the city,
That'd be under
but might
council.
look much bigger if you're only looking at the zones.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if we end up getting ourselves into the issue of effectively
Archive.
doing it so.
I
that
think that's why Mr. Hopkins wants to
Yeah.
look at
That's
the
what
map.
I'm trying to make sure of.
Yeah.
So a quarter mile is 1,200 feet, no,
1320.
1320. The daycare centers around downtown would be the problem.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at. And
Uh,
Emma's right.
500 feet's about a tenth of a mile, Lou.
Yeah,
Yeah, Emma's is the closest one now.
It's easy to go by halves, quarters,
Yeah.
eighths, because of sections
Sure.
that. The 40-acre part, the 80s still show up in the city of Urbana in interesting ways.
So let's see. So if you'll recall, last year during the medical cannabis case, we created maps with 1,000-foot buffers. So yeah, so here. So these are maps showing 1,000-foot buffers from all licensed daycares, and who actually, this is an older version of the map, so not all of the licensed daycares are on here. But these definitely show schools and some of the daycare facilities.
But not churches, right?
No, not churches.
Yeah, so 1,000 feet, you're pretty well wipe it out.
Yeah, well, the one that I'm looking at, I think is like right there. That's Emma's. You can't see my pin.
Yeah, so Emma's would be. Can you see? Let's see. So Emma's would be what, right up here?
Yeah,
Wait.
right near.
Oh no, it's right. It's at the Schnucks, right?
Right.
So it would be right. All right. Let's see.
It looks
So,
like it's
yeah,
outside
so
of
right
that
about
buffer,
here.
but yeah, somewhere right in that red block, exactly.
Yeah. So if Emma's were there, you might have. That might take out this, your eastern part of downtown.
Combine that with 1,000-foot buffer in between these establishments.
Right.
There'd be very many spots.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I think 1,000 is
Too much.
definitely too much.
Well, we
Do
could
you
go.
think it's too much because we get too close to effectively banning them via zoning?
I think that if the outcome is that they are going to exist under the zoning ordinance, there are places they should exist and places they shouldn't. And if the 1,000-foot buffer keeps them from being where they should be, then they might end up where they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I'd be inclined to make a motion to amend the current version to make it a 500-foot separation from each other and from the list of other facilities.
mandatory motion by Mr. Hopkins. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Otto.
So that would be changing the language in 7-5F1, where it says 100 feet. Replace each instance of 100 feet with 500 feet.
Yes.
Pardon? That's why I said each instance of
Yeah.
100 feet with 500 feet.
Any discussion on the motion?
Would you consider a friendly amendment to include that distance to be from gaming halls and other restaurants that have video gaming?
Oh, so we add where it says now existing licensed gaming halls or other licensed gaming facilities,
Yes.
which would include bars.
Doesn't that end up the two restaurants where we might normally say it's okay to?
No, see, now, this only applies to the gaming halls, not to other restaurants which have primary purpose in selling food and a secondary for video gaming.
So, for example, Boomerangs and the Silver Bullet would be fine. They're licensed gaming establishments whose primary use is not gaming. And they're 100 feet apart.
It would also keep them safe from going across the street from the VFW and have better
Correct.
parking and whatever else amenities that would make it easier. I mean, that would put him in direct competition with the fraternal organization.
So make a motion.
Okay.
Motion
By the
to,
way, we need to, I think the way to do it.
We need to
vote
act on the
first.
first
Yeah, let's
amendment
vote
and
on
then
the
amend
first.
the amendment.
yeah. Okay, so on the first amendatory motion, when amateurs play Parliament. Yeah, right. Well, we'll have a vote. We're doing all right. We're doing all right. We'll do a roll call vote on Mr. Hopkins' motion to amend Mr. Otto's motion. This is the 500 feet
200-foot language.
with 500, correct.
Mr. Fitch,
Yes.
Mr. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. Otto,
Yes.
Mr. Storr,
Yes.
and Mr. Trail.
That motion passes. So the language of the original motion is now amended to be 500 feet instead of 100 feet. Do we have any further motions?
Yes, I'd like to further amend the special terms and conditions to include that separation extend to other video gaming halls.
No, licensed gaming establishments.
Licensed gaming establishments. Licensed gaming establishments.
In addition to the institutions already listed.
Thank you.
Can I tighten it
Oh,
up a little
please,
bit?
please.
So, add the words "and licensed gaming establishment" at the end of the sentence that ends gaming halls. So it reads, "An establishment shall be a minimum of 100 feet away from any existing," well, as amended, 500 feet away from any existing licensed gaming hall or licensed gaming establishment.
Good. Well said.
Get that one? You can get it, fish it back out of the minutes.
I'll get it out of the
Yeah.
minutes.
Okay, so we've got a motion seconded by Mr. Hopkins. And once again, unless there's further discussion, we'll have a roll call. Mr. Garcia is ready for the next case.
Mr. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. Otto,
Yes.
Mr. Storr,
Yes.
Mr. Trail, and Mr. Fitch.
Yes. And so now we're down to, back to Mr. Otto's original motion, which has been amended twice, as noted in the record. I think if barring further discussion, we're probably ready for a roll call vote on the original motion, which is to approve the language in Exhibit B as amended. Uh-huh. You want to reiterate the motion?
Yeah. That we recommend Section 2-3, what did I say? The zoning amendment proposed in Exhibit B as amended by Amendment 1 and 2 with the additional recommendation that City Council not adopt this, and how did we phrase that?
City Council
Ban gaming halls.
That,
Gaming
ci-
halls
that
through
City
their-
Council ban gaming halls through their, what authority?
To the city.
City.
to city
Code
council.
authority. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're ready for a roll call whenever you are, Ms. Endell.
Mr. Otto,
Yes.
Mr. Storr,
Yes.
Mr. Trail,
Yeah.
Mr. Fitch,
Yes.
and Mr. Hopkins.
Yes.
That motion passes. Yeah, thanks for bearing with us. Well done. And so that'll be a couple weeks, I guess, Jeff, for the council?
March 16th.
March 16th. Should we show up and tell them in person, interpret our...
I'm going to be out of town. I'm going to have to solicit lobbyists. You can write in my opinion.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on. We don't have any old business. We do have a new public hearing. Plan case number 2255 M15. A request by Joshua Creek to rezone 7.38 acres on East Florida from the B3 General Zoning District to R5 Medium-High Density Family Residential. Mr. Garcia.
Correct. Good evening, everyone. So I'll not reiterate what you just stated in the plan case number. So this property is 7.38 acres, and it currently contains the Point U of I apartment complex. This is on the former Kmart site. If you look at Exhibit A, you'll see what I'm talking about. The area up for rezoning is the area in yellow. And the original redevelopment of the site and that original Kmart site also included this turquoise area down here. But tonight we're just talking about rezoning the area in yellow that contains the apartment complex. As I mentioned, this was a former Kmart site. It was sitting vacant for over 2 years before the city entered into an annexation agreement with CTC Properties, LLC, in 2005 to redevelop the site with, as I mentioned, the commercial portion on Philo Road and then the apartment complex on Florida Avenue. In 2007, the original agreement was amended to allow for less intense use. The original agreement had called for about 300, or at least 300 apartments. The amendment allowed for approximately 170. And then with respect to the commercial area, it went from at least 30,000 square feet of commercial to 12,000 square feet of commercial. Now, at the time that this property, or that the development agreement was entered into, multifamily residential uses were allowed in the B3 a general business district, and since that time, the zoning ordinance has been amended to require a special use for multifamily residential in the B3 district. So as it stands, this property is a legal non-conforming use, and the applicant would like to rezone it to bring it into compliance with the current zoning regulations. So if you look at the adjacent land uses, you'll see the apartment complex is, there's the Philo Road Business District to the left and to the south. And then to the north are the Florida Avenue apartments, which is zoned R5. And then you have single family residential, a couple of duplex or condo uses. And then to the east, you have 2 apartment complexes that are zoned R4. So with respect to the comprehensive plan, if you look at Exhibit C, you'll note that the area was recommended as community business, but it was highlighted as a potential to study alternative land uses for redevelopment. And I'll note that the year that it was, that the development agreement was signed to allow the apartment uses was just after, that was 2005, so that was just after the comprehensive plan came out. We feel that the property adheres to the comprehensive plan goals and objectives, including to preserve and enhance the character of Urbana's established residential neighborhoods, to promote a balanced and compatible mix of land uses that will help create long-term viable neighborhoods, to promote infill development, to provide to provide a strong housing supply to meet the needs of a diverse and growing community, and to avoid development patterns that can potentially create an overdependency on the automobile. Let's see. So based on the current development of the site, we feel that the R5 zoning district would be the most appropriate. If you look on table If you look on the table at the bottom of page 4 of your memo, you'll see the requirements of the R5 zoning district, and that is compared to the point as it actually exists. So you'll see that it meets all of the requirements for the R5 zoning district, including minimum lot size, average lot width, the height of the principal structures, maximum FAR, minimum OSR, and all the required yards and setbacks. Now, for all rezoning cases, we always use what are called the LaSalle criteria to evaluate the merit of the rezoning, and I'll just run through those briefly here. So the first one is to evaluate the existing land uses and the zoning of the nearby property. As I mentioned before, it's adjacent to both residential uses and then the Philo Road Business District. So we believe that multifamily uses are quite suited in areas that are adjacent to business uses, such as the Philo Road Business District. Not only do they provide a customer base for those businesses, but they really help to smooth the transition into the less intense residential uses, such as you see to the north and northeast. Number 2 is the extent to which property values are diminished by the restrictions of the ordinance. So this would be the difference in value between its current zoning as B3 and the rezoning as R5. We're not sure if the current zoning of B3 would directly diminish property values, but it does make the property a legally non-conforming use. So we feel that rezoning to R5 would certainly make it more attractive for instance, to banks that are lending money for financing for the property or for insurance companies to insure the properties. Number 3 and 4 pertain to the health, safety, and morals and general welfare of the public, and to the relative gain to the public, as opposed to the hardship that's imposed on the property owner. The property already exists, or the apartment uses already exist on the property, so there would really be no detriment to the public to rezone this property as we see it. And since keeping the zoning as at B3 would perpetuate a nonconformity, we feel that it could be a potential hardship for the property owner, as I mentioned, if they wanted to acquire insurance or financing for the property in the future. Criteria 5 is the suitability of the subject property for the zone purposes. As I stated before, it's highly suitable for the R5 district. It meets all of the requirements for that district. Point number 6 is the length of time the property has been vacant as zoned. This property is not vacant, obviously, but before it was redeveloped, it had been vacant for over 2 years. So I just wanted to reiterate that again. So in this case, Plan Commission has 2 options. You can forward the case to the City Council with a recommendation for approval, or you can forward it to the City Council with a recommendation for denial of the zoning request. Staff recommends approval of this rezoning. I can answer any questions you have. The applicant is also here to answer any questions you may have that I
Any
can't.
questions for Mr. Garcia? Thank you. Any questions? Mr. Storr?
Thank you. Is there any tax advantage for the change in zoning, or how does this change any assessments or? Thank you.
I'm actually not sure about that. Jeff, do you know anything about that? Or-
I don't believe this would change the assessment at all.
Any further questions? Mr. Trail?
You say that this was a permitted use at one
Yes.
time.
Yeah.
And that now it's become a special use.
No. No, sorry. Go ahead, please.
What are the nature of the criteria is this a special use in B3 because the intent is to discourage this type of use in B3, or because you want to only encourage certain types of multifamily, or trying to get at how incompatible this use is with B3? I mean, it
Mhm.
might be a little more central to R5, but residential's allowed in B3. So I'm trying to get how non-conforming it really is. That's what I'm kind of trying to get my head around.
I would say is more the latter. It's more when people build apartments in B3, we want to make sure they fit into the context appropriately, and they don't pave over all of our business corridors with apartments. So it's not entirely inappropriate, but it's just to make sure they're more appropriate.
I guess we're trying to, what is the advantage in terms of zoning to an area that looks pretty clearly from a zoning was considered a business corridor, to zoning it to residential, changing the zoning to residential only because the current use, which probably, you're not saying this is, if they had applied for this today, this type of development today in B3, probably would be approved. As a special use, probably would be approved, right?
Probably.
I'm not quite getting, because R5 seems more restrictive to me than B3. Is an intent from Urbana's perspective that we really want this to remain residential? And we're, abandoning the goals of the zoning of that area, or?
Well, this is an application that came from the property owner. But our analysis, basically, our intent for the area is that it remain stable. When it was a former Kmart site, it was not very stable. Now that it's been developed with a viable use, we'd like to see that use continued. And since it's been subdivided, it no longer fronts on Philo Road. So it's now entirely on Florida as the frontage. So we think the residential is appropriate.
Although there isn't much left. I mean, mostly it's been cut off from a fairly narrow, not very deep frontage area. Doesn't that leave the remaining B3 along Philo there fairly restricted?
I'm not sure if I follow.
The corner of Philo, right, and where, all along the frontage along Philo will remain B3, correct?
Right.
But it's
Kevin,
gotten to be fairly narrow
could
now.
you scroll up to the first
Yeah.
map?
To the
Yep. Just so we're
Right.
Yeah.
So
Showing
now that B3 zoning along Philo has gotten to be fairly shallow.
right. Yeah, and those were essentially
Doesn't-
outlots for
Doesn't that,
Kmart.
harm the potential uses for that under B3?
It would restrict them, but they are developed and they are successful businesses. They seem to be running fine with their current lot configuration.
But the point is still in business in its current zoning by that argument.
This should be discussion.
Yeah, we'll stop and bring that into discussion later. Mr. Otto, did you have
I had
another
a question.
Yeah.
Would zoning that B3 require a new business in the commercial block? Would that impose any restrictions? Are there uses there that they would have to serve notice to? Would it change what they can do by right on the commercial lot if it's changed to R5? Does that impact what can be done by right in the commercial lot?
No, the commercial lot will stay B3 and it will have all associated rights that it's had since the
Okay.
property was developed.
Any further questions, Mr. Storr?
Thank you. if this is rezoned as R5, does that make these vacant lots that border or on that property, is that going to make them more like easier to discourage business or make them more likely to be converted to R5 multifamily residential, because now you've got a increased residential presence there?
Really practically the only effect is I think there's some more buffering and screening requirements between B3 and R5 than between B3 and B3. So the vacant lot behind the storage facility, if it's developed, they would have to put up a screen between them and the point. But otherwise, I don't think it would really affect them.
Any further questions for Mr. Garcia? Mr. Otto?
The mention of screening, so let's say you had some sort of a 24-hour business, a gasoline plaza with a 24-hour car wash and so on, that wanted to go in the commercial lot. That could potentially be bothersome to people whose apartments are backing up to that or facing onto that. Could the commercial lot owner be required to screen that? However, if it's a B3 zoning, they wouldn't be required to screen it because they can do that by right. So you suggested, I mean, it's precipitated by your response to Mr. Storr's question.
So the landscaping screening requirement between B3 and R5 for the, let's see, so that would be a rear yard. They are required to provide a landscaping buffer of minimum depth of 5 feet on the B3 property if it's developed.
So it does impact the development.
Yes, it does.
Mr. Hopkins?
What about existing B3? So on the west?
The one that's
Right.
in turquoise on the map?
Right. That they would not.
And the ones north of the turquoise
Yeah.
spot.
Yes, they would not have any new requirements unless they were to redevelop.
Right, okay.
Yep. Further questions for city staff? Thank you, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you.
Let me just quickly run down the procedures for a public hearing. The staff has presented its summary of the case. The petitioner may now make a statement outlining the nature of the request and present evidence. Other proponents of the case may be heard. Opponents of the request can present evidence and can ask questions through that I may relay. Then others may be heard. There may be additional commentary by city staff. Petitioner may rebut, but not present new evidence, and then summarize his case. And then the Plan Commission will close the public hearing, and the Plan Commission will discuss the case further and possibly vote. So would the petitioner care to address the Plan Commission?
This is us.
Thank you. If you could state your name
Sorry,
for
Joshua
the.
Creek.
Thank you.
This is us simply just wanting to comply with code. We brought this to the city. There was not an issue that required us to. We just want to comply, and that's really why we brought this forward. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Creek? Mr. Storr?
Thank you. Mr. Creek, it's the same question that I posed earlier. Is there a tax difference or assessment difference between the is in the zoning, in the way this is zoned?
Not to my knowledge, but I would have to look more into that.
Mr. Otto?
Do you still own the outlot in front?
The commercial lot, sir?
Yeah.
No.
Any further questions for Mr. Creek? I just did want to clarify, you're not planning to build or otherwise redevelop this property at this time? It's just...
No, this
yeah.
is purely to meet code.
Great. All right, any further questions? Thank you, sir. Mr. Fell can't speak to the Planning Commission on this, so there being no one else in the audience, we'll close the public hearing and go into discussion. Anybody have any thoughts? Mr. Otto? For city staff, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I assume that the other property owners there between the subject property and Philo Road were notified, and there's no comment from them one way or the other?
That's correct.
Mr. Hopkins?
I think I'm going to go ahead and make a motion, and then I'll explain
see what
why.
happens.
So I move that we send case, which I don't have in front of me, to
2255.
2255 M15 to City Council with recommendation for approval.
Moved by Mr. Hopkins.
And I guess before I discuss it, I need to get a second, which maybe I'm not going to get, so.
Do we have a second?
I'll second. I'm
Second,
curious
Mr.
what
Otto.
you have to say.
Yeah. Seconded by
So-
Mr. Otto.
So, I think there are two things going on here. I think it's actually in the city's interest to rezone this. And it is roughly consistent with what was going on at the time of the comp plan, and the reason the notes that Mr. Garcia pointed to in the comp plan were there. At the time that Kmart was built there and the original zoning for business to the depth from Philo Road, that was closer to the East Urbana Regional Shopping District. That's where what passed as what we now call big box stores were located. That has not been the case since roughly 2000, when Kmart began to fail, and when Myers bought the property at the corner of Windsor and Philo Road. So the quantity of land zoned for business, that is Zone B3, between Florida and Colorado, is actually still too much. And there's vacant land there. The vacant land behind what used to be Piccadilly's has been vacant for ever. And that is, I don't think it's ever had a development of any urban kind on it. So you can decide when you think that growing corn on it did not constitute vacancy. I think the fact that no corn is grown on it at the moment, as far as I know, is probably the real measure of vacancy. Because I remember when it was. So I think we want to do this, and I wouldn't be surprised if the city actually wants to rezone even more of this area so that this becomes a more reasonably focused community commercial node rather than a mile of failing, obsolete depth of commercial zoning along Philo. So I think this is a great first step, and the added restriction is precisely what we need, because residential is what is going to happen, not commercial.
Mr. Trail?
Is the remaining the depth of the remaining frontage along Philo, you're saying you think this is in the city's interest, and they might be, would they have You're saying it's too deep. Would be, in essence, I
Well,
think
there's too much of it,
and probably too
and-
deep,
and
not
for the
commensurate with
kinds-
big parking lots with big boxes set well off the road.
right.
But is the remaining, because this chops it fairly close. I mean, it's not real deep there.
But there's still,
Is that still commensurate with?
well, you've got vacancies. If you go,
But I'm saying if you,
Just those three properties
right,
that,
but if you did the whole thing along there
Adjacent.
to that
yeah,
depth,
to Kirby.
look,
yeah.
I
Would
am
that
not
still
trying
be
to
a B3
design the rest of the
designation?
rezoning
I know,
tonight.
I
I'm
know.
just saying that to me, it's very clear this rezoning is to our advantage. And it's in part very clear because I'm pretty clear it's not enough rezoning. How much more rezoning we should do, I didn't figure that out yet.
I think
So-
Mr. Trail's question is, do you think that those three properties, it's still a viable commercial space? And I think Mr. Inkster answered, he thought it is. And those are
You-
the three
you
that are
mean-
adjacent to Kirby.
are they still viable for the purposes that you would normally see in B3?
Right, correct.
Um,
So we don't have that graphic up now. I
The-
think it's in the packet,
the-
actually.
So, I mean, the simple answer is, I don't know for sure. My guess is that the long north-south strip behind what used to be Eisner's and Piccadilly, behind what is now CVS and the store, that should probably be rezoned. I don't think we want it commercial off Colorado, and I don't think it's viable commercial off Colorado. That is rezoned probably to something like R5, I don't know. There is plenty of depth in the commercial on the west side of Philo at that point. There is still the old Kroger site, which is largely vacant, and I haven't heard any interesting rumors lately. I'm guessing that it might be that site is no longer viable as commercial, and that concentrating the commercial between Florida and Colorado would actually make sense. Because we've got a whole lot more commercial now
Yep.
at
Mr.
Windsor
Otto?
Road and Philo Road.
I mean, it seems to me, looking immediately there at the area in question for tonight, we've got an apartment building there. It's nearly new. It's not going away for a generation or
Yeah.
more. And there are viable businesses in those other lots. And I think, I mean, you've persuaded me, there's no reason not to do it and ratify that, and down the line, other properties as well, because those big box stores are out of fashion now. People want to pull right up in front of a business and go in and get something, and that's what you see in those three. I was in one of those businesses in the last month, sitting in front of that. So
To-
they're very
to the-
viable for.
To the extent that big box isn't out of fashion, it's probably going to relocate along High Cross or at where Meyer did as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, another way of putting it, I would not want a commercial enterprise of the size of this parcel to locate here from the point of view of the current evolution of the land use pattern. And therefore, not having that parcel available as B3, I think is desirable.
Mr. Storr?
I mean, besides commercial, would this also allow office buildings and such, or is that a different?
I doubt it, in R5, yeah.
No, I meant in the B, in these B3, in the B3. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
The sheets in the packet
Oh.
list all the uses.
yeah, B3, it's a very wide range of just about any kind of sort of commercial use you can think of, office supplies. I mean, almost everything's permitted. About the only thing that's not permitted is as multifamily residential. Strangely. So yeah, I think the answer is probably yes.
I sure hate to see the loss of some business of it. I mean, looking beyond just the immediate few years, and the possibility that maybe there might be some other types of business besides big box stores that might want to locate in this area. I am not unsympathetic to the request because it's currently being used for multifamily, but once it's zoned that way, I think it'll be. I mean, we've lost a certain amount of area where businesses might be made someday.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? Let's vote. I'll call for a roll call. Whenever you have a chance.
Mr. Trail,
I'm not sure it's the right vote, but I'm gonna vote
Mr. Fitch,
Yes.
Mr. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. Otto,
Yes.
and Mr. Storr.
No.
That motion passes, and will that be March 16th as well?
Yes, sir.
Great, thank you. So, we don't have any new business tonight. Don't think we're going to have any audience participation. Do we have a staff report?
On the dais today, we have handed out this CD-ROM that contains the 2014 annual report for Plan Commission. Terry put this together for us. It's got summaries of all the cases that you've heard, along with lots and lots of pages of minutes. So that's available. If you'd like a hard copy, just ask us. We can get that to you. If anyone in the public would like a copy, we can get it to you as well.
Thank you. Anything further?
I guess I could mention the digital OASS text amendment. We took some time to work on creating a license program ordinance as you guys had proposed or requested, and we'll be presenting that along with the zoning ordinance text amendment on March 9th to the Committee of the Whole, City Council.
Great, thank you, Mr. Inkster. We don't have a study session, and therefore we're adjourned.